Okay.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this with us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's a
Yeah,
pleasure.
sure. So really, I just wanted to get into about a
Well,
little bit
I hope
about
it's going to be a pleasure.
what was that? I didn't. You cut out on me.
I said, I said it's a pleasure. Then I said, well, I hope it's going to be a pleasure. Like I could foresee the future, which I can't do. So I hope it's going to be a pleasure.
It has to be, right? Are you on a time schedule today?
I need to be done in an hour. So you got me for an hour.
Okay.
If you need me for an hour.
So just so the viewers know, you're zooming in from Australia, correct?
I am indeed. I'm a long way away from wherever you might be. Although you might be in Australia watching this. Who knows? In this wonderful international web world that we all share.
Now, are you in Sydney?
I am. Yeah, I live in Sydney. I'm actually in my studio at the moment. I've built a little studio here to accommodate my projects, and it's a virtual kind of environment studio. So
Oh, nice.
downstairs, you can see through that window back there is a studio, a green screen space, and we can link the camera to the workstations up here and drive computer-generated environments that we can then link in and hopefully in real time to our environments downstairs, to our actors downstairs. And though we're still developing the technology, putting it all together, not so much developing as stealing it from various sources and joining it all together. Yeah. And we were getting very close before the lockdown happened. We actually shot a short film as a kind of R&D process to get the studio up and running. But of course, then everyone decided that we couldn't come into any physical proximity with each other, and it's slowed us down, obviously, substantially. As you can see, there's no one in here apart from me today.
Yeah. Now, is this, do you use mainly the studio for your YouTube channel? If you want to talk about that for a bit.
Well, YouTube is one of the things that I do. I obviously do a lot of other stuff as well. And it's, it's been great fun doing. So I've only really started doing YouTube things probably in the last couple of years, and really in the last year with any real focus. Look, it's a wonderful medium, as you know. It's great fun doing stuff. Years ago I used to do commercials. I used to do advertising and music videos. That's kind of how I got started. And those industries became increasingly frustrating for me, as they have become for many people. So I don't really do those things anymore. But I really miss the opportunity between feature films to do stuff just for fun, energy, put a lot of energy into it, get together with a bunch of people and just do something, shoot some stuff, and I miss that part of it very much. And so YouTube for me has kind of replaced that kind of instant gratification as a filmmaker, because, feature films take years and they seem to take longer and longer to get going, and then years to complete once you're actually on them. And so as a film director, you kind of you lose touch with what it is that you do. I make films. That's what I am. That's the creature I am. And if I don't get to make do some kind of filmmaking, I go slowly nuts, and so YouTube for me is this wonderful kind of like instant gratification, this instant hit. So I've been doing more and more of that sort of stuff. And I started just doing kind of explainer type, masterclass type videos, but I soon get a little bored of doing, talking about filmmaking. I like to talk about, I have a lot of interests in life, and I like talking about those other interests that I have. So I've moved kind of away from, how to make films kind of stuff. There's so many people on the internet telling you how to make films that I figure, I don't know that anyone wants to hear how I make films. I don't know, some people do, but I've branched off into other areas, and I've also started making dramatic narrative little short films, experimental films, which has also proved to be great fun to do. I just finished one that's getting a great response that we've kind of done during the lockdown, the isolation, and you know, I just posted it on YouTube, and now I've got film festivals wanting to show it. You know, they've seen it on my channel and they've started coming to me, which is nice. You know, it's really great. So it's I recommend it. I highly recommend YouTube. I think it's great for filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, now it's so easy for filmmakers to get their work out there. You don't have to go through a studio. You can just do your own thing and just blast it out on YouTube or wherever you go, and people can see it. You know, you can have thousands of people seeing it, and like what you just said, that the studios even pay attention. They pay attention to what's going on in YouTube, and they've offered YouTubers work in the studio.
Of course, yeah.
I
mean, it's look, let's not pretend that it's a perfect model. I still think there are better ways for filmmakers to get their work out there, because, of course, YouTube doesn't pay us schmucks anything. You know, I mean, if you get 1 million views or whatever on your short film, you might get some smell of an oily rag kind of payment from them, but you know, not that it needs to pay people a lot, because obviously film production can be done more efficiently these days, but there is still this kind of correlation between how much your art takes to produce and how much you receive back from people enjoying your art, you know, and that correlation doesn't work on YouTube unless you are, you know, PewDiePie or someone who's a humongously successful YouTuber. You know, obviously it works very well for people like that, but they're a small handful of people, and it doesn't so much work for people like me who's got a vested interest in storytelling, not so much presenting stuff. You know, I never wanted to be a guy in front of the camera presenting to people. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do, you know. That's my passion. So it doesn't really service us in that respect. You know, we need to, not that I want to be a billionaire. I don't want to be PewDiePie. Don't particularly care for that sort of level of luxury or whatever in life. I don't need it, but I do expect my art to sustain me, and more importantly, to sustain me being able to continue doing it without going broke, you know. So that's something that YouTube doesn't do very well, and it really relies on, I don't want to say exploiting, because people are happy to be exploited, but it does exploit young newcomers who will just do anything to produce their work and get it seen, you know. You get to a certain age like me and you go, well, you know, you do have to pay the rent every week. You know, I've got a family I need to feed, you know, so it doesn't really quite work for people like me. So then the question is there another model? And I believe there is another model, and we need to create that other model. When I say we, I don't necessarily mean me. I mean someone has got to create that other model. I think there is a huge potential in some kind of mid-ground between YouTube and Netflix being on the other end of the spectrum, which is they commission filmmakers to make product, and then they own and, you know, pay people very well, of course, and then they own that product outright, you know. Whereas in YouTube land, you get paid ostensibly nothing to get your product shown and exhibited, but you still retain complete authority and ownership of that product. So if you can derive some other income, then YouTube has nothing to say about it. That's all for you, you know. So I think there's some mid-ground somewhere where filmmakers can produce their product, produce their content, get it shown, and derive a reasonable, acceptable level of income from that product. Because obviously YouTube make gazillions of dollars every year, right? They make a huge profit. It's increasing, and the content providers for their service, which is what we all are, see a tiny fraction of that, you know. doesn't seem quite fair to me, you know.
Yeah. I know a couple creators who spend so much time creating this video, and I had one friend tell me they got a check for $15 for a
Yeah,
year of work, and it's just
exactly.
ridiculous. And my brother Simon and I have been, we've been saying this for a long time, that there has to be some other platform created for filmmakers and creators of that stature, that they can still own it, but also bring in some income, like you were saying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I post stuff on Vimeo as well, and Vimeo is kind of that platform, but unfortunately, no one watches Vimeo. Everyone, you know, YouTube has huge market share, and no one can really compete against them. But you know, I still live in hope that we can, you know, some other platform will eventuate, because there's a huge need for it. You know,
Yeah.
there's a huge desire for that platform to exist. You know, if we can get enough, if someone can build it and get enough filmmakers and enough content creators on board to provide stuff for that platform, and gives them enough of a reward to do so, then maybe we can, you know, we can turn the tables a little bit and start, you know, driving this other, you know, this other way forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. For those who don't know, what is your YouTube channel called?
It's called Mystery Clock Cinema, which is my production company in the you know, the I want to say the real world, the film world.
Okay, yeah, I'll put a link down in the description for the viewers can check it out.
Yes,
Um,
please do.
so now, are you originally from Australia, or did you move there?
No, I'm born in Egypt, and I moved to Australia. My parents moved to Australia when I was about 3.
Mm.
So I'm, you know, I talk with an Australian accent because I've known nothing other than Australia, really. And I've obviously lived in the States. I've lived in Los Angeles over the years, and many other places. But I call Sydney home. I like it here. It's particularly when there's all these germs floating around in the rest of the world, and we, you know, touch wood, we seem to be doing better than most here because we're kind of isolated.
Yeah. I mean, I live in Texas, and yeah, this virus is just seems to be
It's
nonstop right
bad there,
now.
right?
No, yeah,
Yeah,
it's bad. We had in the last 5 days, I think they reported 153 new cases,
yeah.
and yeah, and who knows
Well,
how long.
we had 8 new cases yesterday in the whole country. So what's the population of Texas? Do you know?
I don't know. I know where I live. It's 500,000. The city
Yeah.
that I live.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Australia doesn't have that many people in it, and Texas might even have as many people as Australia. I don't know. We have, I think, about 26 million people, 28 million people in the entire country here. So, and it's a big, you know, Australia as a landmass is as big as the US, right? It's a big continent, but it's an island, so it's kind of isolated, you know. And I think the only good thing that the government did here was that it clamped down on flights coming in very early. You know, as soon as it started, you know, hitting other parts of the world, they stopped. Apart from people returning home on holidays or whatever, they pretty much stopped people traveling here. And I think that actually made a huge impact on why we're doing as well as we are, you know. But look, at the same time, I mean, it's and I guess people are realizing that, and I think people in your part of the world are perhaps trying to push forward in relieving the lockdown and letting the economy start to move again, because the hit that the economy's had is far worse than anything that the virus could have done, you know. And it's very much the same here, because we've still, even though very few people got sick and died here, I think the entire death toll in the country has been like 90 people, less than 100 people. So it's like nothing, you know. Even on a per capita basis, it's nothing compared to places like the US, you know, and many parts of the world. but we still got locked down the economy still got locked down as much as anywhere else, if not more so than anywhere else. And so right now, like yesterday, they just had these figures were just released about the unemployment in Australia. Now, the official rate is 6%, but 6 million people are on this unemployment benefit, right? So even though they're not officially saying we're unemployed because they're being looked after by the government, they are in fact effectively unemployed because the businesses they work for are no longer operating. That's why they're claiming this compensation, you know, and that's half of the workforce. That's 50%. You know, the entire workforce of Australia is 12 million people. So that's actually means that 50% of our country right now are unemployed, which is catastrophic to the economy. I mean, that's a hole you never come out of, right? That's just a complete disaster. And I know in the States, you guys have very similar issues as well, you know, if not as bad, you know, getting there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, especially, you know, in Hollywood's every production that was happening, even post-production, they shut it down. They shut down everything.
Yeah. No, I'm well aware. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, people are suffering, especially those that are grips, that are technicians, people like that don't make as much money as these A-list actors or these A-list directors. You know, they're out of work, and they have and they live month by month on their paycheck. So yeah, it's
yeah.
You know,
well, we're in the same boat, and you know, I don't want to always make this about the film industry because people accuse us of being kind of whining about our own industry. That's why I sort of try and always talk about the greater world, the greater economy. But I mean, yeah, the film industry has been completely mauled by this. And you know, like here in Australia, as an example, which is something that maybe some people don't know about and worth talking about, is not only has everything been shut down, but the government are not providing support to film workers, casual workers at all, right? So we're not included as part of those 6 million receiving compensation. So literally, people, if they can't find another form of employment, their business just goes under, and so many have gone under in the last few weeks, and increasingly so. And you know, we at filmmakers in Australia are starting to think that the government don't really want us around as an industry. You know, we're not the big industry that the US has. We're not the lucrative Hollywood industry. You know, we don't generate that much in terms of revenue every year. So maybe the government had just decided, you know what, we don't need these film people anymore. You know, so that's obviously of huge concern to us all. And you know, where we're all questioning whether there is ever any return from this. You know, on a worldwide level, we're all questioning whether, you know, cinemas will continue to exist. You know, this new world this post-coronavirus world economy that we're going to find ourselves in, many businesses will just not survive. You know, businesses will evolve into something else. Many will evolve. And if they don't evolve into something else, they will die off. Well, cinemas maybe are one of the businesses that will not survive. You know, people seem to be happily watching Netflix and all the streamers at the moment, and their stock is going up like crazy.
And I think, you know, AMC theaters, you know, they were filing for bankruptcy.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think
when you think about it, it's a model that's really difficult to sustain because they don't have, you know, they don't own the real estate. They're usually leasing from other parties. So literally there's a building sitting there, they're paying lease and being completely unused, even though they've let their staff go. And, you know, multiplexes run with very few people these days, you know, because they don't have projectionists. It's all done digitally, et cetera, et cetera. It's really the people who man the box office and the concession stand, you know, is the staff. But still, it's the real estate that's costing them money. And But the question more so about getting through the lockdown is, after the lockdown, will people really want to go back to the theater again? You know, that's the
Exactly.
thing. It's like, what do you put shields between, like plexi shields between seats, or do you have, like they've just said yesterday, they said restaurants can have 10 people in them, right? Now, some restaurants will be good with that. You know, restaurants that only had 10 people there every day anyway will be good. But a lot of restaurants that had hundreds of people in them, and you know, 20 or 30 staff, you know, waiters, chefs, etc., to um, uh, to make those restaurants function, they're not going to come back because they can't make that model work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. As far as your career, let's get into that a little bit. You know, I always like to ask when we interview filmmakers, what do you remember the age of what the movie was that you saw for the first time that was like, wow, that's magic. This is something I want to learn to do.
Yeah, I do remember, because it made such an impact on me, and I remember exactly the circumstances. Um, my dad was my father was a big film guy. He loved going to see movies. You know, he's just a working class guy, had a job at a factory, but he loved seeing movies, and he'd take me. I'm an only child. He'd take me and my mother every weekend. We go and see a movie from as far back as I can remember. So I know I started seeing movies when I was probably a baby, you know, going to the theatre. I was probably one of those annoying children who start crying in the middle of a film and had to be taken outside, you know. I think I contributed to that. But the first movie I remember that made a humongous impact on me, and it's a movie that I still love to this day, was 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, my dad took me to this theatre in Sydney, which is a Cinerama screen, so a really big screen with 6 channels of magnetic sound, which was pre-Dolby, but still sounded extraordinary. And I was I must have been about 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old, because this wasn't the initial release of 2001, but 2001 had a bit of a funny release pattern, because they brought it out in 68 or something, I think it was, and it failed miserably at the box office, but it developed a cult following, and then they re-released it in the early 70s, you know, which is when I saw it. But they released it. It had another wide release in Australia and in many other places, because a lot of the stoners at the time were smoking dope and like, you know, getting high while watching the movie, which was considered like the ultimate trip, was an actual phrase on the poster. And they discovered that it had this kind of weird cult following. So I don't know that it was just for that reason, but they re-released the movie figuring that it had missed that audience early on. And sure enough, it actually did better on its second release than on its initial release. So I was there as a 6 or 7 year old watching it, probably amongst a whole bunch of people smoking marijuana. I don't know. I can't remember that much of the detail. But I remember and I had no idea what this film was about, of course. It was it was just incredible imagery and sounds and you know, amazing sequences, which I had no concept of what the story was or anything like that. But it blew me away as an experience, right? It's something that I don't think any film has ever been able to reproduce, that perfect storm of that kind of movie making with a kid who was totally open to this as an experience at that age. So for me, it was just, I had to become a filmmaker from that point on. There was nothing else I could possibly become. It kind of infected my soul on that level, you know. Yeah, so that was my first experience. And then I remember soon afterwards seeing many other films. It was a great era for filmmaking. You know, I grew up in the 70s when I think Hollywood produced the best movies, and I don't think any era has come close to that era of filmmaking. So I was very lucky to grow up in that period. They were my formative movies. I had movies of a very high caliber, to the point where I assumed that's what movies were. That was the bar to be a filmmaker, that not only that I had to achieve, but that I wanted to achieve, because that's I considered movies to be. That's no longer the case. I don't think that standard of filmmaking excellence has been maintained at all.
Yeah, yeah, especially today. I mean, I don't want to knock these superhero movies. I mean, they're fun, they're enjoyable, but it's largely spectacle now. It's you don't have that deep, I guess, thought like in 2001. You're watching this movie take place and unfold, and you're thinking about what's happening while you're watching it. It has a lot of depth to it, and we just don't get those films anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the superhero movies are harmless, but as conceptually, they're harmless experiences. They neither contribute nor take away from the culture, but as financial models, they're disastrous for the film industry. Before COVID-19 appeared, I always thought, well, superheroes are going to be the death of cinema. They're going to be the death of the big screen. And the reason I say that is, even though the genre is harmless, the fact is it's killed all other genres, right? People go, when I start saying this sort of stuff, people say, but movies have always had, genres like the westerns and the whatever. And it's like, it's going to come and go, whatever. Yes, it's going to come and go, but in the olden days, while the Western was around, there were many other genres as well. There was the musical, there was the cop movie, the noir. There was all sorts of other genres that were all parallel processing, so that when one disappeared, there was another one reappeared. So, the Western died and the biblical epic took over, became the genre of choice. Science fiction then it became a bit of a sort of subgenre for a period of time, in the wake of Star Wars, the first Star Wars, But unfortunately, what's happened now is that with fairly recently with Marvel and mainly Marvel, but the others as well, becoming the preeminent and one and only genre, to the point where studios don't want to invest any resources at all into original fantasy, science fiction, or any other potential genre that might replace it, any other IP of any kind, really, because they can see the money you can make out of superheroes. The danger of that is that if that's all they make, there's nothing else underneath. There's nothing else coming up. Here's another genre coming up. Okay, the superhero genre falls down. Let's start, going, people want to see another one should come up underneath as well. That's the way Hollywood once worked. Now it doesn't, because it's run by narrow-minded, unimaginative people who all they care about is the bottom line. All they care about is the big money. Hollywood's always wanted profit, of course, but now it's about the big profit, right? And who are running scared because they don't want to lose their jobs, because if they greenlight anything other than something that's a surefire, no risk prospect, they will lose their jobs. Their bosses will say, well, you messed up, So that's the way the entire economy has been going. But Hollywood in particular, the art form has suffered enormously from that fearful landscape that these people operate under. Working with studios, I see it operating immediately with every decision that is made. It's all come out of fear. Fears sustain every day of their working life.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I've always said for a long time, Hollywood, yeah, it makes film, but it's a business. And these studios run it like a business. Of course, they want to make their money and make money, as much money as possible. But I didn't think that before that genre came about, they didn't put as much emphasis on money before the film, if that makes sense.
Well, it's the problem is, yes, it's a business, and that's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with running a business and running a business to make money. I mean, that's otherwise a business won't sustain itself. It's like what we were talking about when we first started this call about YouTube and content creators. You know, if you look at your YouTube channel as a business, then it's got to be sustainable. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to keep doing it. You know, so there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, the attitude is one through this fear, as I say, it's one of short-term gain, right? It's one of not seeing the forest for the trees, not seeing ahead and planning ahead, right? It's limited vision, it's limited imagination. And so, yes, your studio might make a lot of money out of another Star Wars or another Thor movie or whatever in the short term. But what happens, as I say, what happens when people lose interest in Star Wars, when people lose interest in Thor or whatever, and they will. It's just it's a fact of life. You know, superheroes are not going to be with us forever. Eventually, people are going to get tired of them. I'm personally amazed that I haven't already fucking gotten tired of them by now, because I sure as hell am. You know, to the point where if anyone actually offers me one to do, I go just not interested. It's just like 10 other movies. You know. So that's going to happen. And so if you don't plan forward in your business to sustain yourself through that inevitable transformation, the business is going to fail. And that's why, well, I believed up until COVID that was going to happen to Hollywood, to theatrical presentation, you know. Well, I think COVID-19 has just really added fuel to that fire. I think it's just getting us there quicker, but I think it would have happened anyway, probably. You know?
Yeah, true. You know, talking about superhero movies and comic book movies, of course, your, I don't know whether your feature film debut with The Crow or...
No, The Crow is my second feature. I made a feature called Spirits of the Air, Gremlins of the Clouds, the longest title one of the longest titles in history, which I shot in Sydney on a very low budget. So The Crow is actually my second feature.
Okay. Yeah. Now we love The Crow. I mean, Simon and I saw it when it came out in '94, I believe it came out, and we were 16, and it just caught us off guard. We weren't sure what the movie was about, and we're just blown away by not just the visual style and the direction, the way the camera moved, but the whole gothic tone. But it wasn't just about this guy who comes back to life seeking vengeance of the murderers, but it had a lot more depth to it, a lot more humanity to it than I was ever expecting.
Thank you for saying so. I mean, I try and make unusual films. I don't like making films that I can say, my film is going to be like this other film. I know that's what a lot of people are expected to do, but I personally want to make films that are not like other films, you know. That's why I'm not interested in doing other superheroes now, because I feel like I did my anti-superhero movie way back, and I'm just not that interested in going over ground that I've already gone over. I'm interested in trying something new each time, you know, which is not a very popular way for a filmmaker to be in Hollywood, sadly. You know, if I wanted to make The Crow 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, or not that I would have, because with the tragedy, there's no way I would have made another Crow movie because of Brandon's legacy being that movie. But if I'd wanted to, I certainly could have continued. I could be making them still to this day, probably, you know. But that would be no fun for me. And I like basically doing something new each time. And so I always have a hard time selling that something new to the studios. And as I've wanted to retain my sense of being original and doing something fresh each time, Hollywood has become more conservative over the years. You know, Dark City, which I made after The Crow, my next film after The Crow, I couldn't make that movie now. I mean, it's just, it would be impossible to make that movie now at that budget range. I could maybe make it as a low budget film or something like that, you know, because Hollywood just ain't interested in that kind of stuff, you know. So The Crow was like that. It was an attempt. It was my way of making a Hollywood movie, my first Hollywood movie, but giving it a sense of the original and not really making it like anything else. At the time we were making that movie, the producers were pitching it like Batman. They were saying, because that was the only other example before The Crow was, excuse me, was Tim Burton's Batman movies. I think he'd made 2 by that stage, if I'm not mistaken. And I knew it was going to be nothing like Batman. You know, I kept saying I'm making the anti-Batman, actually. I saw my movie as being far more grungy and more like a Taxi Driver or something like that, you know, more like a grungy 70s movie, you know, which is, as we said, the type of movies that I grew up on. And I think that's why it affected people, because it was not Batman. It was not like tongue-in-cheek, kind of larger-than-life stuff. It was reality-based superheroes, which has become kind of the norm now. But in those days, it was kind of an unusual thing, you know.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
So I think that's probably the wide.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I'll tell you know, of course, you know, we saw Batman in the theater when it came out, and we liked it. We thought it was great, but when we saw The Crow, we felt like that was our Batman, if that makes sense. That was our comic book movie, because, like you said, it had that grit, it had that darkness to it, it had that 70s Taxi Driver type feel to it that no other movie has had before that in a superhero genre. And like you said, it's an anti-superhero, not, you know, Batman coming to rescue, you know, damsel in distress. It was complete.
Well, I think the thing is for a bunch of people, like a group of people, to take that sort of ownership of a movie like you did, it has to speak to them as an individual, you know. And you know, like Tim Burton's movies are fine, and but the thing about them is they are very much heightened fantasies, right? They're larger than life, you know. And The Crow was kind of a very much a conscious attempt on my behalf to make something very grounded in the real world. And you know, even, you know, its use of music, etc., was a way to say this is kind of our world that you're seeing. It's sure, it's tweaked, you know. It's not really Detroit in '93, whenever it was. It's tweaked, and it's all shot on sound stages and backlots, etc. But it's still kind of, I think, the concerns, the kind of the street crime, the drug use, blah blah blah, all the stuff, all the elements that are in that story, I think are all very much part of the real world. They're not heightened, you know. Well, they are heightened, you know. The villains are pretty crazy, really. They're pretty over the top, but still there's
swallowing
a sort of
bullets.
Groundedness. Like,
yeah,
there's a groundedness.
Exactly.
And also the visual style is very much a sort of attempt to do something that made it look unique and fresh and didn't copy other movies, you know.
Well, you succeeded. You succeeded very, very well with that. I mean, yeah, I mean, to this day, it's still one of our favorites. And you talked about actually, before we get into Dark City, I wanted to ask a question. You know, of course, the tragedy of Brandon Lee, I don't want to get too much into it because, you know, I'm sure you've talked about it, you know, to death.
No, I haven't talked about it, and I don't really talk about the tragedy.
Oh, okay.
I talk about Brandon, you know, that's fine. Brandon is someone to talk about, you know. He was an incredible guy, and you know, I completed the movie to honor Brandon's memory, you know, because I didn't want to complete that movie. It was horrible what happened, and we shut down the production, and I left Wilmington, North Carolina, where we were making the movie, and didn't want to come back, you know. But his family and the cast of the film were all very proactive in convincing me that, you know, we should finish it in order to honor Brandon. And I came back and watched the cut and could see that he created such an incredible character that this should be his legacy. I mean, if anything positive was going to come out of the experience would be that people would at least remember Brandon Lee through The Crow as an incredible, amazing talent, a beautiful person, which I think also comes across through the film, strangely enough, and lost, tragic lost promise, which is, the guy would have become he would have become the major movie star, I think, of his generation, if the tragedy hadn't occurred. That is obviously clear, and it's clear to a lot of people. So that's why we finished the movie, and that's all I ever say about the movie and what the tragedy. And it's to honor Brandon. And the only time I ever step back into talking about The Crow, which I don't really particularly enjoy talking about, I haven't even seen the movie since we completed it, because it's too painful to watch. The only time I ever talk about it is when they talk about doing a remake of the original movie, and I go, well, that's wrong, because Brandon is, everyone knows The Crow. Yes, it was based on a comic book, sure, okay, but everyone knows The Crow. You got to be honest, and you got to tell me that you know about The Crow because of Brandon Lee and because of that movie, right? So anyone making doing a remake is basically using that legacy for financial gain, which I think is an absolutely sick idea.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Just leave it alone. Let's try and leave something alone for a change. Let's be honourable in Hollywood and leave something be. Let it remain Brandon Lee's legacy. That's all I can say.
I completely agree with you on that. The one question, Brandon put so much heart and soul and depth into that character that elevated the movie even more, I think. And I don't like talking about it a whole lot either, because of the same reasons. Of course, you were closer to the event than I was, but still, it's heartbreaking what happened. But it's just an unforgettable performance that he did in that movie. And one of the films that really put the nail in the coffin, that solidified you, at least to us, that you were a director that has something more going. And we thought, we have to follow this guy's work, was after we saw Dark City. Well, one thing that we love so much about it is that, it's a sci-fi movie, but it's more so essentially a 40s, 50s noir film. And my question is, what were your influences for writing the story for Dark City?
Dark City was written as a kind of a kind of process of using a kind of a method that's almost like automatic writing, which is kind of you basically conceive of an idea and then you let it take you on a journey, so that you're surprised by you're halfway between being an audience and a creator. You're kind of a participant in the experience of creating something, and it's a fascinating way to work, and I've worked that way a few times. I've just done it on another script that I'm hopefully going to be making, touchwood, sometime when the lockdown lifts and we can get going. And it's a basically, it's hard to quantify in a simple way, but it's like you create the characters, you create the situations, you've got a loose idea of where it's going to go, but you let the characters kind of drive it and take you on a journey. And sometimes you find them taking you on a journey that you don't really want to go on, that you go, why are we going in this direction, But out of that comes some wonderful stuff, and what I hope is fresh and unique and original ideas. I'm not one who believes that there are no original ideas in the world. I feel that's like a real cheat, and that's, people who quote that are usually pretty lazy about stealing ideas from other sources. I believe that an artist's quest is about trying to find original ideas. You don't always succeed, but that should be part of the journey. And if something is too much like someone else's work, you should kind of go, well, let's not do that. Or if you do it, at least be honest about it and actually tell people that that's what you've done. People are always scared of litigation, I guess, in order to do that. So I believe in the case of Dark City, I did stumble upon, I conduited some unique ideas, some original ideas that then many other people followed on and redid, you know. But I do believe that I was the sort of the initial conduit for those ideas, and I was really trying to create something, that a film that I'd not seen done before. The only real inspiration, well, no, there were many inspirations, but inspirations on one particular strand, which I've always been very clear about. You know, German expressionist movies inspired, you know, films like Metropolis. Many of Fritz Lang's films inspired the visuals of Dark City. And noir is, you know, noir in Hollywood really came out of the German expressionist style of filmmaking. You know, in fact, a lot of the people who first practiced noir in the US came from the German expressionist era. Fritz Lang himself migrated to, he saw the writing on the wall with Adolf Hitler in Germany at an early point, and fled to the US and continued making movies there. So I think that those two styles are very much part of the same development. You know, they're part of the same strand of progression. So I was inspired by Lang and the German expressionists. You know, a lot of the sets were designed with like very low ceilings and weird angles and stuff to inspire in a very subtle way the German expressionist school of design. And I was also inspired by then anime on the other side of the spectrum, Ghost in the Shell and Akira, more specifically, the two films that I was inspired by. But Akira being the whole idea of telekinesis, I think was really inspired by Akira, and the final battle in Dark City between Murdoch and the head stranger, Mr. Book, was very much inspired by Akira. A similar telekinetic battle happens in that film. So those were my main inspiration. And then, like, photographically, there's like Ouija's, a photographer that you may be familiar with, who used to take kind of a lot of crime scene photographs in the US in the 40s and 50s. So, you know, there were all sorts of little inspirations, but the basic concept was one that really came, I don't know where it came from. It really occurred to me, as I say, through this process of automatic writing, of conjuring stuff, trying to conduit stuff from, you know, some mystical muse that artists latch onto. You know, dreams were very much an influence, you know, and that's part of that process. The strangers, the concept of the strangers and how they interact with reality and change reality while the population of the city are asleep, came from a sequence of dreams that I had where people were doing, the strangers were appearing in my dreams doing exactly that, you know.
Oh, wow.
So I use that as a narrative strand in the story.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, one thing is, you know, that opening shot where the camera goes through the city and into the bathroom where Murdoch is passed out. I mean, it was just as soon as that opening shot happened, we were hooked. I mean, it like you said, I mean, it has such a visual style to it, and it was just something that we never really saw before. Just completely.
Well, you know, that shot is something that is, I've done that same shot in most of my movies. Sometimes it just doesn't fit in, but I try and get it into every movie because it started off being an opening shot. It's actually in The Crow as well, almost exactly the same shot. Camera flies over the city like it's the bird's eye view of the quite literally the bird's eye view of the Crow, and it ends up going through the round window where Eric has been thrown out of that window, and like Ernie Hudson's there looking down at the street or whatever. Very similar shot, and that shot, what that shot represents to me is a moving into the eye of the filmmaker, right? So the window's always round because they represent an eye to me, and you're moving into the eye and therefore the perspective of the filmmaker. And it's kind of saying to the audience, I've actually never told this to anyone before because I don't like telling people what the symbolism in a film is, because I like people to make up their own mind. But I'm getting on a bit, so I might as well confess all this stuff to you. The whole notion is that my movies are always stylistically designed, right? Because they're a point of view. They're not necessarily the point of view of a particular individual character. They're the point of view of the filmmaker, of the creative artist behind the work. And I believe that good films should always be the work of one viewpoint. And I believe, I believe in the auteur, which is a very old-fashioned concept for filmmakers, But moving into the eye, for me, saying to the audience, you're coming into my viewpoint, right? It's not going to be exactly your viewpoint. It's not going to be your reality. It will be some version of your reality, because, hey, we all share the same world. We all share the same reality. But you've got to understand that everyone's view of that reality is completely different, right? You might agree on what the color red is with someone else, but how do you know that you're talking about the same color red? You know what I mean? It's like everyone has their own viewpoint, And I really believe that the audience have got to accept that you are participating, you're experiencing someone else's view, which may be a little skewed. It may be a little bit not exactly your own, but it's an interesting thing to see. Therefore, I say I'm the storyteller, and therefore, for me, it's I like movies that have that unique view. I don't want to see, I don't want to see something that has got a view that everyone agrees is the same color red. I like something that shows me a view of the color red that I had never even considered before, that I find fascinating, And it's another reason why I like movies rather than like, say, games, because I like a story that's told beginning, middle, and end, and actually concludes in some way that it tells me something, right? That's what I want to experience. I don't want to experience a multiple choice ending or creating the story as a participant in my own way,
or you have to play 7 games in order to get to the conclusion.
Exactly. Yeah, I like the idea that it's a story that's told to me that I can take something away from that storyteller that I've not had told to me before.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it was great. No, I love talking to filmmakers like yourself, because you have so much to say, and as I've said before, that me and my brother, we're both filmmakers. We dove in the business for a little bit, and we have friends that are filmmakers, and so we have that filmmaker mindset, the visual mindset. So it's really interesting to hear other people's perspective of how they made these films. So I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. No problem.
How did the studio feel about Dark City? Because I know they stupidly changed the beginning with this narration that completely ruined the ending of the film at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, it was nonsense. The only reason I agreed to that is because they just wouldn't give me the resources to finish the film if I didn't agree to it. So we had to come up with a battle plan, and that was my way. I was a bit kind of cunning with that, because I knew that was the easiest. They were suggesting all sorts of other things, right? That would have been far more destructive. And I thought, the easiest way to deal with this is slap a voiceover on the beginning of the movie, because I can always change it again later on. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. I got to do a director's cut, and we took it off, and people could see what there was a whole cult also that developed with that movie when people realized that was a tacked on studio voiceover, that people would actually screen the movie and turn the sound off until you saw Kiefer looking at his watch or whatever happens, and you realize they knew the voiceover was over. So a lot of times the film screened theatrically without any sound at the beginning, to the point where people started asking me whether that was a concept of my own. And I said, no, that's not. That's literally some projection as some fan who's decided that's the way to watch the movie,
Wow.
which is kind of fascinating. Um, but but um, but yeah, it's look, the studio were, you know, the when I finished when I made The Crow, and The Crow did very well at the box office. Then the studios are all asking you as a filmmaker what you want to do next, and I kept saying, here's a script. I'd already written Dark City. I wrote it before The Crow, and they'd say, well, yeah, great, but what else do you want to do? You know, no, people were scared of it even then. They didn't want to make it. And so I was lucky in many ways, and it went through many studios until we got to do it. I was eventually lucky in a way, because New Line, Mike DeLuca was running New Line, and they were literally the only people who were brave enough, even at that time, to make the movie, you know. And they were doing, I think they just done 7 with a mate of mine, David Fincher, and they were doing good stuff, you know. And so I felt that was the right way to go, and they were very supportive at first, until, of course, the movie started testing, and we started testing it in a very poor form, because we'd gone over budget, and they canned the production, and we couldn't shoot. There was all sorts of scenes missing, so it made the story really hard to follow, you know. And they wouldn't let me shoot those scenes until we started testing the movie, I think, from memory. So we tested a very poor version of the movie, and as a result, no one understood the story, and it was a disaster, you know. And from that point on, it was like all downhill. That's when they started saying, okay, to shoot these extra scenes, now we want to put, you know, so they went overboard and suggested too many changes that I think did the movie damage in the end, you know, theatrically speaking. But you know, so it's this kind of, I had this weird experience, which was initially very positive, but then it went off the rails, just because of kind of poor management, I think, is what it was. And I wasn't experienced enough to know how to manage all this stuff as well, you know. So yeah, that was my.
Well, it's kind of like, as a studio, how can you have uh, honest, legit previews audiences if you don't have a full film? I mean, that just doesn't make.
Yeah, well, I ask myself that question to this day, but that happens all the time. You know, even like the Crow. I remember that was my first test screening experience. I remember, a guy comes out. I mean, I'm sure you've been to many of these test screenings, so you know what happens. But literally, a guy comes out and says, "Now, the visual effects aren't finished. Blah blah blah. The sound is rough. We haven't mixed the film." Well, he tells you all this stuff too. But of course, it's when you start watching a movie as an audience, even if you're an experienced filmmaker, you forget this stuff. You can't constantly, you know, if the movie is doing even half of its job, you start getting involved with the characters and the story and the world, and you start to forget that, you know, the visual effects aren't finished. So you start to watch it on the same level as you watch all other movies. And if something truly is bad and it stands out, you're not going to compensate instantly by going, oh, it's not finished, it's going to be better. You just take it at face value, and it takes you out of the movie, right? So I've argued since The Crow that we get to as far progress as we can before we screen to a test screening, you know, because whatever intel we get out of the screening won't be real unless the movie's real, you know. And I still struggle to this day for studios to listen to me, because they just panic at a certain point. They start to lose a sense of the film completely, and they start to believe that it doesn't work and that you got to test it to find out what's wrong with it. And it's just another bad way that Hollywood manages things. You know?
Yeah, true. I wanted to dig in a little bit about Garage Days, which, again, another film of yours that we loved. Now, you went to, I want to say you went to basics on this one, you know, which really was a huge turn from you directed The Crow, Dark City, and then you do the smaller film. You know, it feels like I don't know if this is true or not, but it feels like one of your most personal films that you directed.
Yeah, well, I mean, all my movies are personal. I don't have any real feelings about that. I mean, yeah, it is part. I mean, look, it's inspired by a period of my life. in Sydney, but I mean, all my movies are kind of inspired by something out of my life. You know, if I can't find that inspiration, I usually don't like the idea. You know, even if it's written by someone else, I tend to look for things that have that personal identity. No, look, I think the best way I can summarize Garage Days for me is it was very much a knee jerk away from Dark City and The Crow. You know, Dark City and The Crow are very much related. They're done. They came from this a very similar place. You know, I sort of see them as a kind of part of a trilogy, which another movie I did later on is also part of, which many people don't really know, but it is definitely part of this trilogy. Garage Days was very much a departure, and it was done. Look, it was a departure financially. It had to be, because Dark City didn't do well at the box office at all, you know, and it's ended up doing quite well over the years through video, but initially the box office was not good, and so no one was going to come along and finance another film of that scale in the immediate future. So Garage Days was an attempt to do something smaller, more simpler, and also genre-wise to go in a completely different direction. You know, as I say, I like doing things to challenge myself that are unique and different. You know, the film community doesn't really like filmmakers doing that. Once they pigeonhole you, and I was very much pigeonholed. By the end of Dark City, it's like I'm the dark gothic guy. There's just no breaking away from that. So my perverse nature meant that I tried to seriously break away from that and do a romantic comedy. You know, I mean, how much further away can you get, you know? And as a result, I was probably punished a little bit, because everyone was like, what? You know, on the posters they put like from the director of The Crow and Dark City, and people would go, and they'd be like these happy, smiling kids in colorful costumes. And so people were kind of a little bit kind of blown away. But for me, it was like, it's part of what I do. I like doing something new each time, something different, you know. So that was the kind of conscious attempt to do that, you know.
Yeah. I mean, to me, as a storyteller or filmmaker, if you're doing the same stuff over and over and over again, it starts becoming routine, and there's nothing fresh there. It starts becoming monotonous. And as a storyteller, you have
Yeah,
first of all, ways to tell a story. You're not just, like, as you said, the goth guy.
I agree. It's no fun just doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, you learn something new from everything, but I think you really learn something new when you throw yourself into the deep end. That's what I like to do each time. You know, it's also you know, I'm an experimental filmmaker on some level, on everything. Like, I like experimenting. I like trying something new. I mean, it's always calculated. I'm always conscious of the fact that I'm balancing someone else's investment while I'm making films. I don't want to lose anyone money, because it, you know, pragmatically just means that I'm going to have a hard time making another one next time around. You know, you're only as good as the last movie you made box office wise. But at the same time, I do like to challenge the audience and experiment and do stuff that they haven't seen before, and create textures and narratives that they haven't experienced before. And that's why I produce films like The Crow and Dark City, and also my recent much maligned Gods of Egypt, because I'm not mimicking something that I've seen that I know will work. I'm genuinely trying to do something unique each time, and often that's misunderstood. Sometimes it's embraced, and sometimes it's misunderstood. And that's the challenge you have as a filmmaker, is to try and make it so that more people embrace it. You know, for me, the frustrating thing is that every movie, like films like Dark City, which are now upheld as great classics of the genre, you know, it would have been nice if I had a little bit of that love back then when I made it, because that would have actually helped me make the next one. Whereas, you know, now not so much, you know.
Yeah. You know, our time is almost up, but I just had a couple more questions for you. You know, I have a good friend of mine, Tyler Hawes. He
Sure.
works in post-production, and he wants to start getting into directing. He's directed some commercials, but he wants to start getting into film. He had a question for you, if you don't mind answering. I wrote down here. He says,
Sure.
he says that he has some director friends who has had horrible experience the first time working with big stars, having to walk on eggshells and feeling compromised in executing their vision. He says that when you worked with Will Smith, he was at his peak of his career, the biggest star on the planet. And you also worked with Nick Cage on Knowing. He says now he's not necessarily asking you to comment on Smith or Cage, but what is it like working with stars of that caliber as a director? Is it stifling, or does it come down to individual chemistry and personalities?
Well, I'm very happy to talk about both Will and Nick, because they're both lovely people, and I still remain very close to them. I think they're terrific guys, and I'd love to one day maybe do something else with them. It's always about finding the right material, of course. I've been very lucky, generally speaking, with actors and with movie stars. I've been lucky to work with guys that are, and girls that are nice, genuinely nice people. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I think I treat them well. And I know what I want. I'm not someone who is shy or reticent about directing them and working with them and getting the best stuff out of them. I think that's what it is, perhaps. But we get along. So I've been very lucky. But of course, you can be very unlucky as well. And I have been unlucky in some other instances with actors who will remain nameless, of course, who are also prominent, maybe not of the level of Will and Nick, but are prominent movie stars who perhaps have a lot of insecurities, and can be quite destructive to the process. And look, if I could give you advice, and it's a luck of the draw, because I'm sure there's for as many Wills and Nicks, there's probably big movie stars out there who are probably really difficult to deal with. I find that with most people, or certainly the ones that I've dealt with, knowing what you're doing as a director and being clear and precise with your ideas, and also knowing when not to direct. There's a time when you don't want to direct. I've worked with inexperienced actors who sometimes say to me, "Why don't you give me a direction?" I go, "Well, because what you're doing is great, and I don't want to fuck it up. Why should I say things just to hear the sound of my voice? There's no real reason." So earning that trust with actors, whether they're movie stars or not, is really important for them to know that you know what you're doing, and therefore you're going to get the best out of them. That's the key thing. But I have to be honest with you, with some people, that just won't work. Some people, yes, they're nightmares. They exist. They're really difficult. I think a lot of it comes out of insecurity. And if I had any advice to give you, I don't know what it is. All that I can say is, whoever they are, do the best you can to maintain your ability to gain their trust and explain what you want and how you want it done, and what you want them to be able to, who trust you and who come.
You froze there for.
I think we've flicked over. I think you lost me.
Yeah. We lost you there for the very ending.
I got a little label saying you are the host now. And I'm like, I am the host of nothing because you're not there. So
yeah, that was weird. I don't know what.
So anyway, I was just rabbiting on about Nick and Will being nice. Yeah. I do have to go. So maybe just one more question.
Sure. Yeah.
Ask one?
If you were to give a filmmaker one piece of advice that was given to you, what would that be?
I sort of touched upon it, and it is something that I never knew how to answer that question, but I do know now. Finally, at my age, I've worked it out. Do your own thing. You can go and find a story that you're truly passionate about, but try and speak with your voice. Or not try and speak with your voice, because that's kind of a little wishy-washy. speak with your voice, be an original. Don't be frightened to be an original, right? We get a lot of input from people around us. We get a lot of ideas thrown at us while we're working. We get a lot of ideas after we've made the film, people trying to tell us what the film was about or what they didn't think worked, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of criticism, of course. But at the end of the day, the only real voice you can trust is your own, you know, and more importantly, yes, you're making a film for an audience, but you really should be making a film that you are happy with, that you want to see made, right? And hope to God that you have a taste that conforms to that percentage of the movie-going public that is going to pay the bills to keep allowing you to make movies, right? That's at the end of the day what it is. But I think don't steer away from speaking in your unique voice, okay? Find that voice firstly, because sometimes it takes a while to find it. But once you do find it, hang on to that like there's no tomorrow, you know? Don't conform to the ways and the styles and the ideas and the views that the mainstream wants you to create, okay? Because that's a dead end, basically, that you won't get anywhere. You know, you might get a superhero movie to do one day, and if that's what you really, really, truly want to do, then all the best to you. But as I say, there's not much beyond that, you know, unless you are creating stuff that is meaningful to you and you're expressing it in your own unique way, you know. So it doesn't matter whether you're starting off or whether you've been doing this for 100 years and you've finally understood this as a concept. But I think the best filmmakers fully align themselves to that viewpoint. So be one of those best filmmakers, you know.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Well, we'll let you go now. Yeah, you know, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule again. And you know, it was a pleasure talking to you. Yeah, so we can't wait to see what you have in store for the future. On your YouTube channel, and also if you have any feature films coming out. And yeah, so we want to thank you so much for chatting with us today.
For sure. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thanks a lot.
All right, we'll see you. All right.